Hello and welcome to the Six Sales podcast. This is Mike Nicholson from Six Sales. Today I'm going to be speaking to Sarah Vincent, the Managing Director in the UK at Utiq. But first, a quick note to our sponsors. Thanks very much to Mike Follett and the team at Lumen Research for sponsoring the Six Sales podcast. For those that don't know, in fact, for those that do know as well, Lumen are an eye tracking technology company which are helping brands to understand the patterns of human attention and helping brands to plan, buy, measure and optimize towards real human attention. So thanks to the team at Lumen. Sarah, how are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Good, very good. Thanks. Very nice to have you here. Bit of a day you've had of it. You've been here, there and everywhere today.
Here, there and everywhere, yeah. Up and down the country, but yeah, it's all good.
Fighting the good fight. So traditionally, to kick us off, we like to ask people what they've done in their career to date that's led them up to the job that you've got at the moment, which is obviously MD at Utiq in the UK. So can you give us a bit of a potted history of your career?
Yeah, I can do that. I'll try and keep it top level as well. But so I guess my first job was actually in recruitment. So not adtech, not in digital advertising at all. And I started that when I went to Australia straight after uni. So I did that for 2 years there. And then when I came back to the UK, it was actually a Canadian company and they wanted me to set up an office for them in the UK. So I did that. I really enjoyed that. And I actually think I wanted to talk about that because recruitment, you know, your product is actually people. So you very quickly learn a lot of really good sales skills, but also how to be empathetic, how to build your people skills and how to build relationships and actually realize that whatever business you're in, whether that's technology at a later date, it's all very people focused and people are everything. So that gave me, I think, a really good grounding. My boss was incredible. And yeah, I think it set me up quite well. But then when I was in London doing the role, I was starting to get jobs coming in that were for advertising companies, so digital advertising roles. And I was placing people in these roles, but I was more and more looking at the job descriptions thinking, this is really interesting. This is really interesting. Maybe I might actually switch and do something like that. So that's where it all kind of came about. And I joined a company when I was selling ad space on a TV listings website, getting to learn the whole joys of the three-letter acronyms and the jargon that's associated with digital advertising. So that's
so funny. I wonder if that's an occupational hazard in recruitment that you see so many job descriptions that eventually you think, oh, I fancy doing that instead of recruiting. I wonder if does that happen a lot? Do you know? Have you heard of it?
No, I don't know. It just felt it just was very much a kind of a light bulb moment for me because I thought, as much as I'm enjoying this, there is a whole other world of this industry that I haven't even thought about. And also when I mean, this is dating me, but when I was doing the recruitment in the agency in Sydney, there was no email. So I was asking candidates to post their CVs to me and they would ask, can we email? And we were like, oh, I haven't got that yet. Yeah. So obviously it's just very much an emerging industry at that point and just started to look quite fun. So
well, this is dating me as well, but that's reminded me. I mean, my first job in media was at the local newspaper group, which is part of NewsQuest now. And that's where I met my wife, who we actually work together. She works at Six Sales. And the page plans, which is basically how the newspaper pages would be laid out, Karen used to draw by hand on pieces of A2 paper. And we didn't have computers. And it just feels wild, really, that there was a time where we just used to manage like that. We have desk phones, obviously, but then no mobile phones. So when we went out for the day on our rounds, you couldn't get hold of us. It was quite nice. Yes, I know. I know. Oh, how things have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from there, I then continued in that space, really. I worked as a publisher for a bit. I've mainly been doing sales roles, and that's selling advertising, sponsorship packages, etc. online. And then I left that company, joined a small business called Just Premium that was a Dutch company.
Azerion now? Gum.
Yes. So they were high impact advertising, obviously the new technology coming over from the Netherlands. Started kind of walking around the streets of London, banging on the doors there of publishers and trying to educate and talk about how high impact advertising was going to be much more effective. And it might feel quite obtrusive, but actually, it will drive higher CPMs, so you can perhaps reduce the ads on your page because of it. And that was actually probably it was my experience in a startup business because we were very thin on the ground. There was like a couple of boots basically. And it was really fun. I just remember being like, it was just a really fun time. And I think that is now what I'm doing at Utiq. It's kind of going back to those roots of, the education, the getting out in market, But coupled with all that experience that I got at when I joined Index Exchange following Just Premium.
Yeah. I think what you said at the beginning there of the recruitment, it's so true. And I think our industry especially, I've looked outside our industry for a little while, but basically been in our industry for a very long time. And it is always about the people. We can talk about all these brands that we've worked at and these technologies and these cool things that they do, but it's about the people that sort of bring all of that together, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the people, it's not only the people you work with and the people that you collaborate with, it's the end customer as well. And we always need to be thinking about that person. When we think about anything that we're trying to develop and deliver and optimize, it has to be about it grounds from the
user experience. Absolutely, yeah. So, what do Utiq do then, and who do you do it with, and how do you do it, and why?
So Utiq is a joint venture between the 4 largest telcos in Europe, and that is Vodafone, Orange, Telefonica, and Deutsche Telekom. About 3 years ago, they started working on a project, a collaboration project, where the principle was to use existing telco technology that all the telcos use as a way to identify the population in a market, and take that and apply it to digital advertising so that the scale of addressability could be delivered in a different industry. And it kind of almost came about from the very beginning of our chief product officer, Utique, is a guy called Will Harmer, and he was working at Vodafone at the time. And in the MarTech team, they were seeing more and more of their advertising spend going into the platforms and away from the open web. And frankly, because it was a lot easier to buy media within the walled gardens. There was a persistent identifier, which is usually an email address. Reporting was good. It was really easy. So, and like many other brands, more and more ad spend was going to the platforms or the walled gardens. Mm. And so it was that scenario and that problem statement, I guess, which kind of spurred the telcos into action, thinking, well, maybe there is a way of bringing back some parity to walled gardens in the open web by having a persistent identifier. Then it levels the playing field a little bit, makes the open web more attractive, more competitive, and as we're finding, actually more performant than the walled gardens.
Okay. So years and years ago, I approached, I think it was Belgacom. It was the biggest telco in Belgium anyway. And we were talking to them about trying to take their data and use it essentially in a similar way to that you're talking about now, but basically taking all of the very deep data they had on the large part of the population and using that for advertising terms. And I remember very clearly us giving them a projection on, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it was millions of dollars or pounds or euros or whatever it was. And they were just like, well, that's not really anything to us because telcos obviously are very big businesses, and it was like a rounding error. So obviously something's changed since those days to get those sort of massive companies together. What do you think? What do you think has changed to sort of make them suddenly start taking an interest in advertising?
Well, I think it's so we're talking about a collaboration and stakeholders which are essentially 4 fierce competitors in the job that they do and their day job. They are mobile phone provision, broadband provision. That's what they do for the business. And within the telcos, there are innovation teams that look for new revenue opportunities, new revenue streams, utilization of technology, and how just making use of assets that telcos have. And it was really from those innovation teams that Utiq was born. Right. So it's never going to be anything like the telco business. The numbers are very different, and that's almost the best outcome, because whilst telcos will continue to focus on what they do, they have the ability to be able to provide a technology, a solution that is going to enable and help another industry. But it's not it's not sort of life and death for them, but they want to lean in to be able to leverage what they have to bring a better outcome for another industry. And I think it's less about revenue really. It's about utilization of technology that exists. Ultimately, they also are advertisers, right? So if we can build a better advertising industry, for them to advertise within, it's a win-win situation for them. So it's not not altruistic. It actually, but it's not quite so much about bringing any kind of revenue that's at level where they'll see for their telco day job, I guess.
Yeah. I assume that they can't target each other's customers. You don't get EE trying to target Vodafone customers and stuff.
No. And then I will say that point actually about the data. So when you talked about that Belgian telco, we don't touch any data. And that's one of the things it's really a common misconception when we talk about us being a telco joint venture, because the assumption is then we're leveraging that data. It's incredibly rich data in some way. But our technology is not. It's purely about the tech to identify a user and then identify when they come back to a site. And then it's then all about enhancing that publisher's first party data, because we can underpin it with a very stable identifier, and then they start to overlay the data that they can gather from that user.
Okay, so the data, the building up of a profile of a person is done at the publisher level.
Yes,
with first party data.
Yeah, we're really strict about that as well, because we don't advocate at all like extensive ID profiling. Out in the open RTB, there's a lot of things like that happen. That's not privacy safe. It's not. It doesn't respect consent, and it's just not a principle that we adhere with, align to at all.
Sure.
And so we're very much on the piece of technology only to create a glue, which brings an incredibly solid foundation level to digital advertising, on which data can be applied within, from the publisher, from the buyer, however that happens. But we're not involved in that business whatsoever.
Okay.
If over time telcos want to start leveraging their data, then they can do so. But it's essentially on top of the Utiq layer, which already sits there, and like any other brand.
Sure. So just making sure I've understood it correctly then. So the benefit to the publisher is they now have a universal ID essentially through Utiq that allows them to understand who all of their audience are, in term not necessarily who they are and how old they are and stuff, but they know that user there is that user there, and then they can start building on top of that user with their own data.
100%, yes. Okay. And so, value for publishers is they integrate with Utiq. They start to generate the IDs of traffic that's coming to their site that aren't logging in, right? Because even if you have a login strategy in the open web, about 10 to 15% of users will ever log in. So there's a huge amount of users that aren't doing that. And so with the Utiq ID, it enables you to see users that are coming back, but you haven't had to ask them to log in. They haven't had to share any personal identifiable information, so no email address. And it then enables that publisher to enhance their own offering. To your point, like they know you've come back and they know what you were looking at and been looking at perhaps on their app across web and app as well. They could personalize content that's more relevant for you. They can certainly provide more relevant advertising. And that's why it's such an added value. So it really helps, and MarTech teams within publishers and brands who also own websites can see that value of the on-site enhancement as well as the ability to target their users and to advertisers.
Okay. So you said web and app. Is it mobile web and app, or is it also desktop web?
It's mobile web, it's desktop app, desktop as well. But really there's stages in our evolution. So on launch, we are able to create identifiers for users who are accessing through mostly a mobile device, but there's connect to a mobile connection. So if you're in the park, you're not connected to Wi-Fi, you're probably connected through your mobile provider. And that's the way that we can generate the ID. Now that's a great starting point. Obviously, a certain percentage of the population use their phones when they're connected to the mobile connection. But we know most ads and actual content is consumed on a mobile device, but when it's mostly connected to Wi-Fi. So the next step is for us to be able to create the identifiers when users are connected to Wi-Fi. Which is super exciting. And we've just done that in France. So we've launched our first Wi-Fi enablement for the IDs in, I think it's about late October, so early October. So we're now starting into stage 2 in France, rolling out across the telcos that are live there. And then we roll that out across the markets as well. And then the third stage is being able to create identifiers through within the CTV and streaming space, because the ISPs, the internet service providers, are the telcos. And so we can do what we do and we just replicate it into other channels, and it becomes quite omni-channel I wouldn't say omnipresent because that's just a bit too big, but omni-channel, and then fully inclusive. And that's where our excitement comes from, because the scale of this is unprecedented. Yeah. This is game changing. This is really simple as well, and simplifies a lot of the complexity that's out there today.
Yeah. So we've talked about on the publisher side, being able to identify pretty much your whole audience and then figure out that, who the individuals are. Is that idea ever passed to the buyer side for them to be able to do the same?
Yeah. So what happens is when we generate an ID, first of all, we get the user consent to do so. So you go onto a website, you consent to Utiq, we will generate an ID that gets sent to the publisher, but we send them 2 passes. One is called the MarTech pass, which is if you think of that like MarTech on their own site, like how they can do that enhancement and audience segmentation that I've mentioned. The second is called the adtech pass, which is the pass that they would attach to a deal when they run that through OpenRTB. And
is this all part of the general consent that you consent to when you go to a website, or is it an additional consent?
Yeah, good question. So it depends on a few factors. But when we launched in Europe, so a year and a half ago, we had a second consent layer behind a publisher's CMP. The reason for that was that we were incredibly strict about gathering free and transparent consent. And also the CMPs within Europe at the time were not necessarily conducive to that. And so it was felt that we would want to, if a user accepted a CMP on a publisher site, then a second consent layer would load for Utiq. And it's up to the publisher if that loads immediately or on like the second session or second page or whatever their choice is. And it was interesting because we've started with premium publishers because that's where it makes sense to get the scale the most quickly. And 99% of our publishers, maybe 30 across each market of the premium publishers, were running with the second consent banner. They saw very little impact in terms of bounce rate for users. Our consent rate was up in 75 to 80%. It was actually quite a good way of capturing that consent. The preferred model is to be integrated into the CMP, because for a user, that's one less screen that they have to look at. So where we can, we are integrated into the CMP as well. But again, in that space, when that banner loads, there is quite explicit text about Utiq, Telco, and the publisher. So there's clarity there for the user if they're reading that to understand what it is they're consenting to.
Okay. It's quite a high consent rate, isn't it? Like compared to the sort of just the average of the first banner, let alone the second one.
Yeah. So our consent banner when we're loading a second banner would only load if the user had said yes on the first banner. Yeah. So obviously if they're saying no to the CMP, we're not loading. They're not going to
say yes to you anyway.
We're not going to load anyway. Okay. But yeah, so we get that consent, then we get 2 passes, and the second pass, as I said, is the adtech pass, which goes into like the programmatic buying. Essentially, the adtech pass contains that very powerful ID. So you need a partner, an activation partner between the advertiser and the publisher to unlock that pass, to enable to set frequency capping and then the deal parameters. So we then work with adtech partners to give them the keys to decrypt the identities so that they can set those parameters. And currently we work with Adform, which is our first ESP in Europe. And we have also recently launched with Equitif as an SSP on their Buy Connect platform.
Okay. Cool. So if we painted a nice simple story to how all of this comes together, so what would be the dream scenario? So I'm a brand. I'm trying to reach certain people. Would I typically want to activate this? Essentially, in I guess in an ideal world, if you've got like 30 publishers in the UK, all very premium, all with massive reach, you can say, okay, well they can collectively put together maybe a PMP in ad form or a creative or whatever, and then I can just target that. And I'm confident of roughly who those people are based on what we know about.
So that's exactly the case, right?
Yeah.
So as I said, we start with, and this is what me and the team are doing in the UK, we're talking to premium publishers, those publishers that pretty much sit on most agencies' preferred publisher listings, because, there's always that scenario of like, well, we want this inventory. So, we're not necessarily going to start down at the bottom with a long tail. So we bring in that premium inventory together. And then what we do is essentially all of those identifiers together form the Utiq audience. Okay, so then a buyer can go into one of those platforms, Equitif or Adform, and select the Utiq audience. Now, why would they do that? Because with Utiq, the audience they're targeting, first of all, is 100% real people. And we can guarantee that because we do not generate an ID, an identifier, if we cannot match the IP that we receive from you when you consent to a contract. And that's literally just a kind of verification piece. It's not anything, again, like I said, none of your data or detail about you. It's just the existence of a contract. Now, bots don't have mobile phone contracts, okay? So we know it's 100% human.
That's the latest scam.
But if you think about a media spend, I mean, 20% of spend may be fraudulent inventory. And of that, a significant portion is bot traffic. So already, number one, brand, you are going to be saving maybe 10+% that you are wasting today showing, advertising to bots. And so that's number one. The second is that we sit across all the browsers. So if the brand is setting a frequency cap of 10, with Utiq, we will show 10 impressions because we have the purview across all the browsers. And we've done some A/B testing on this and seen that in a cookie-enabled path, if you set an impression of 10, you're probably more likely to deliver 18 to 19 impressions because cookies are just not across all the browsers and they break. And so, again, that's huge.
Yeah, your frequency cap is off, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in Spain, some of the tests we've run there, it's almost about like a 20% of ad spend is lost through inefficient frequency capping. Sounds really basic, but it's those two things alone can save already, maybe you're talking now 30% of your ad spend. And then, of course, the scale that comes with it, because we have the way that we work in each market is, although we have our 4 shareholder telcos across Europe, they don't all have customers in every market. And so using the UK as an example, Vodafone obviously does, but Deutsche Telekom doesn't. So Vodafone will work with them and they'll provide maybe a 20% market share, but we still need more coverage. And so we work with local telcos who are non-shareholders who, become part of the collaboration and help generate the IDs and then bring that scale as well. So for the third thing for buyers is that then they can reach that inventory at scale that they can't see today. And the hope is that they will be able to spend more in premium environments than they do in the MFA environments because they don't have to, because they can get the scale that they need within these publisher premium environments.
Yeah, okay. And how is it going? Because I've spent most of my career either as a publisher or selling to publishers. And I remember vividly the dreaded dev queue of publishers. But yeah, I don't know whether that's reduced a little bit. I know there's a reduction in partners is on the roadmap for a lot of publishers, but going from this is a good idea to actually getting it live is obviously can be quite a long process. How are you finding that?
Yeah, so I'll talk to our live markets first because I joined in January. The other European markets have been live for a year by then. So I had a lot of I took a lot of the best bits from what they'd learned. The onboarding publishers does take some time, but it's actually that the contract piece takes the longest. And that's not because they're heavy, onerous contracts. It's because getting priority and time with legal resources is actually quite challenging, especially in this world we're living in today, because there is quite a lot of, there's regulation changes, there's consent or pay, there's DPAs, data protection authorities in each market, like setting out new guidance and things. So there's quite a lot of work for the legal teams to be getting on with. And so it probably takes the longest time to get the contract through. It is what we've found in the UK, but I'm really pleased to say that we get a lot of compliments about our contract and DPA from data protection authorities at publishers who are like, you're thinking and considering everything. And actually, it's not just a question of saying you're privacy first, you're enabling that. Frankly, we have to. We are owned by telcos who are one of the most highly regulated industries. Privacy is absolutely number one. They have a lot of they have trust within their brands, and so they've done a good job in doing that. And there's no compromise with what we're doing in another industry. So it's not the red line back and forward. It's just the time with legal resources. And then the technical integration is actually quite light. I say that like a completely non-technical person, but I even heard our technical head of solutions consultants actually saying it's a light load. So it's not too onerous. It's quite straightforward, and we can get that up and running quite quickly. So
that was the standing joke when I was selling mobile related services to publishers. Just as I was saying it, I could see the smile on their face. I said, "Oh, our SDK is very light. It's just one line of code. You just put it in." And I had £1 for every time I'd heard that. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you, Mike.
So the other thing is, and I've learned this over the years, is about managing expectations correctly and being very upfront as to what the journey that you're on. And so we don't go into publishers and talk about, this is a solution, integrate today, revenue tomorrow. Put it in your P&L. This is a vision, and it will take a bit and a journey that we're all going on together. It's going to scale, and here's the plan for that and the roadmap for that scale. But it's going to take some time to get there. We're obviously trying to expedite that as much as we can, but let's be realistic about it. And I think because what we're actually solving for is resonates immediately. We don't really have to explain it, what the problem is. Everyone knows what the problem
And the
is.
trust of having those huge brands behind you as well is got to be helpful, isn't it?
Yes. And then the market conversations and, what we share quite a lot about the partners we work with, the insights that we gain. It just builds a momentum where there is actually, it's considered that Utique has this potential to be game changing and become a table stake for the industry. And everyone can just move on because, the identifier layer is dealt with. Along with the privacy, they're the foundations, and then you start to get more creative and innovative on top of that. But yeah, I think it's really heartening to see that there is a desire to be part of a project like this, to see the value of it, to see how it solves for the challenges they have, and how it's future-proofed, and how it makes sense, stronger together, more collaboration, the more the momentum this gets, and then actually can deliver what we want it to.
Okay. So I know that a lot of publishers have a lot of their traffic on mobile web, let's say on Safari or Chrome, and with cookies and tracking going away and signal loss, a lot of that audience has been unaddressable essentially because they don't really know who they are. I'm assuming that your solution is helping them to solve that to some extent. And take some of that unaddressable audience and kind of start to build a bit of a picture about who those people are, right?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. It's bringing addressability to the open web, which has just been lost over the last 7 years as third-party cookies have deprecated. Today, when I first started talking about this in January, I was talking 30 to 40% of the open web does not have third-party cookies, is unaddressable. It's actually more like 50% now. So it's not something that we're waiting to happen anymore. It's very much here and now. And then, the identifier can do exactly that. A publisher can know who's coming to their site or can see a repeat visitor and then can start to build up the picture of who that person is to enable, obviously, them to put that into the right audience segment, and then for buyers, the same thing. And you're talking about environments which are, like Safari you mentioned, it's, highly affluent users reside in Safari, but brands are massively underrepresented in there. That's another, reason to use Utiq brand. On top of your other three, this is, going to be environments where you're not exposed today. So there's a rich pool of potential new customers.
Okay. So what does a day in the life of Sarah look like? Sounds quite busy. I know you've just dashed down from Manchester to be here, not just for this podcast. I can't take credit for that, but so what would a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. There is no typical day. Especially I think in the first year and a half of the business, there won't be a typical day until we kind of start to get into our swimming lanes. I joke with the team, we're a team of 3 in the UK, solely dedicated to the UK. But I said to the team, at one point we will all do our day jobs, because right now we're not doing that, we're doing everything, which is awesome. And they are I love the like-mindedness that the team have and how we work together. But I guess my focus in the first half of the year was very much we'd be out talking to publishers. So it's spreading the word, educating on what Utiq is, roadmap, timelines, how we're how we've performed over in Europe, why it's coming to the UK and when. And then the focus for me has shifted a bit more towards demand, because that's the next thing that has to come along. So I'm learning a lot about the buy side. I spent most of my career supply side, or working with and for publishers. So this has been really interesting for me in learning what the structure of holdcos looks like, how agencies work, which teams talk to where you need to be doing. So my day is split between publisher conversations and meetings, buy-side meetings, trying to work internally as well, and bringing together collateral, because this is, we need all of this. Like, the more conversations we have, the more we realise we need to be able to find a way of really succinctly telling that story, and in a way that can be amplified to many. But yeah, I think it's a mixture of in-person and face-to-face meetings, internal, external, PR, do quite a lot of PR, which is really fun. Podcasts, which is really exciting to have that in the calendar, and attending events is another thing, especially this time of year.
Of course, we're going to come on to this time of year. For those that might be listening in like February next year or whatever, we're recording this in November, so it's very cold, and Christmas is just around the corner. I was going to ask you though, something where you were just talking there, something occurred to me. When I've built an SSP business before, the demand and the supply, it's such a fine line, isn't it, between what do you do first, how do you do it? You have to there has to be enough supply for the demand to be interested, but there has to be enough demand for the supply to be interested. Do you have a bit of an advantage because you're essentially enabling publishers to map their own inventory, package up their own inventory, and sell their own inventory, so they can start getting value while the demand side of your business is building? They can kind of do it themselves. They don't have to wait for you to come with a deal ID.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we see that in Europe, that initially the conversation with publishers is that we'll start doing this, we start generating IDs, we can start building and selling those audiences. But also your own sales teams can be out in market talking to the same agencies we are, talking to brands, and selling, your audiences, your Utique enabled. And so it obviously that helps both sides. But yes, publishers can bring that demand in themselves. But it's always a chicken and egg situation. And in all my career, it's always been the publisher that has to kind of jump in first, because when you start talking to the buy side, it's very much like, well, what inventory do you have? You don't have to have a lot. You also, if you can have, it's showing the first thing is to show like a proof of concept. You could have a couple of publishers live, big publishers live, one or two ad campaigns, test campaigns, one ad tech partner to do the encryption, and you run it that way. And once you have got results from that, you can start to amplify the insights, and it starts to grow, and the flywheel is turning. So it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't have to be a mammoth task to get launched at scale, because scale will come.
Yeah. Cool.
And also, but the demand will drive that as well, because that's what I'm finding now is conversations with holdcos specifically, actually saying, how can we help build up supply quickly? How can we help make this more scalable? So, obviously if you go and call publishers with, we've got X spend coming from these brands, do you want to be part of it? Yeah. Then it works. And
helps put you up the dev queue a little bit if there's a number next to it.
But that's fair enough, right? And if you're a publisher, if I was a publisher, I would do exactly the same thing. Yeah, it's like, well, I can prioritize this today if there's a potential revenue on the table tomorrow. Yeah. So that works. And then I think the other advantage we have is that the telcos are also big advertisers in the market. And so there will be a time when, for example, Vodafone UK will want to work and spend their ad campaign, their ad spend all through Utique enabled paths. The CMO said as such on stage this year, and it's because it's obviously an initiative they're part of, they're a shareholder in, but also they can see as an advertiser, they see the benefit of, working across that audience. And so that's another, I guess it's a lever to say, if you get Vodafone spend today and you still want to continue to get Vodafone spend, you need to be Utique enabled. Okay. So that's a very nice thing to know we have in our kind of back pocket as and when we get to that scale.
Yeah. You just need those brands to move agencies very often. So you keep getting into new agencies going, oh, we need to do this now as well. Yeah. So come on then, coming to the end of 2024, soon into 2025. I haven't seen too many of them yet, but it's only a matter of time before the trades press is full of predictions for the year ahead. Yeah. What are your predictions for the year ahead, Sarah?
Well, I mean, I'm an optimist. I'll start off by saying that. Next year, I actually think it's going to be the year of action beyond talking. So buzzwords that were very resonant this year in industry events and in the trade press, I think will become realities. And so which buzzwords in particular? The buzzwords of privacy first. Privacy regulation is not going anywhere. It's only evolving. There is a continual clampdown now on non-compliance. Publishers, advertisers, anyone in the industry cannot really afford to not be compliant because of the cost, the fines that are associated with it. So privacy is no longer a kind of bolt-on second thought. It has to be something that starts, is the core of everything they do, and the partners they work with should be privacy compliant. You should actually have quite high principle standards of privacy. Because then you've just got a really good bedrock on which to build the business. And so I see that, and I've been quite pleased, I think, to hear in the last 3 months at various events I've been to, privacy is always talked about, and it never was, and now it is. But in a way of it can be profitable, it can grow business. We need to be thinking about it, and it's just common sense as well, right? If you respect privacy of your users, you can build trust with your users. If the users trust you, they will spend more time in your environment, on your site. If you're showing relevant advertising, there's better engagement there as well. And so the whole thing actually feeds itself into a better ecosystem. Yeah. So I think privacy is going to be actually acted on and considered. And I think that maybe some companies that are not privacy compliant, there'll be some consolidation probably also as well from those that just don't kind of make the grade. And, I'd say set your standards high, because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to have to answer the regulator as to why you were doing what you're doing. Yeah. Consent as well, that's also coming up. We talk about consent a lot. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important to us to get freely given, transparent consent. Again, it feeds that very virtuous circle of if you get consent in the right way, you give the user agency to manage that consent so they can revoke or they can just monitor what's happening. They are more engaged with you as a brand, and therefore, that brings better outcomes. So those two things I think are big. Curation, I mean, when has it not been mentioned? Probably in the last 6 months. Yeah. I think it's good. I think that was another one. The curation one, I think there is a bit of, criticism around curation being like, well, it's just like a ad network. It's days gone by. And also, if you're curating, by sheer nature of doing that, you're excluding inventory as well. And you could be excluding inventory from smaller niche publishers that actually, have got really good environments and in which to work with brands. But it's okay, I think, because if curation becomes something that more brands with money are leaning into, that's okay, because it's almost just starting off with a bit of guardrails around what they're doing in the open web. And then as that works for them, then you can look at widening those guardrails and being more inclusive and then, making that much more expansive so that more and more independent publishers on the open web can survive, have advertising that support it and delivers it that way. So I'm okay with curation, even though it is a little bit kind of exclusive. Yeah. And then AI, AI. Love this. Mm-hmm. It's often talked about as if it's one thing, like one big AI thing, which is like no one can deal with that. Like there's so many parts to it. It's just too big a piece to think about. And so I think the better way of thinking about it is how we're going to use AI ourselves and in our business. How are we integrating that already? And we are all doing it. We're all using ChatGPT for certain things, I'm sure. We're using AIs to transcript meetings, and it's a big puzzle with many, many parts to it. And so we're starting to just trying to get those pieces together and see how it can grow. But I think it's a scary thing. People still talk about it as this massive object. We've still got a lot of ways to go to understand how we can use it for our benefit, which is the way it should be used. But I know there's companies out there that are trying to help decipher that mystery around AI.
What's your personal experience with AI? Because you mentioned transcribing meetings and stuff. I use a product called read.ai. It basically joins meetings with me. One of my clients calls it Mike's automated friend that keeps following him around to all these meetings. But it's unbelievable. Like it's an absolute game changer. So it just like if you had a Zoom call or a Teams call, whatever, you can record the actual meeting. Of course you can do that, but it also transcribes it. It gives you a summary of who said what and what the to-dos are out of that. It then sends that to your Slack. So you just get a message after the call and just to remind you, these are the things that you said you were going to do. Incredible. And then if you then think, what did Sarah say about that AI tool that she used? I can go in and just search for that and it'll take me directly to the part of the conversation where you said it. I'll click on the text and it'll play that bit of the video. So rather than trawling through an hour going, what did Sarah say about that? And it's amazing. And then, of course, you're building a repository of these over time. So if I wanted to, who told me about that AI tool? I can just AI tool, and it'll take me to the right call. I mean, it's an absolute game changer. That's AI, right? That's but I think my experience, and I'd love to know what your experience is that the AI tools that I've used, things like Perplexity, ChatGPT, and Read AI, they're very good at organizing things, helping you find things or correcting things, and not yet as good at generating things, my personal view.
Yes. I'd 100% agree with that. And I think I'm loving the transcriptions from meetings because, if you don't attend the meeting because you can't make it, because you don't have the hour in your day to do it, then in the old days it gets recorded and then you have to find another hour that you didn't have anyway to watch the recording.
Watch the show notes. Is it worth my time taking the hour? Yeah.
Exactly. But then the AI transcriptions can really help with that because you've got that, and to your point, you can search, you can see exactly what the actions are. We're not using it that tool just yet internally, but we're testing something, so we'll be doing it. But I think it is more about taking away the mundane tasks of your daily life. Taking away, like, your skills are so much better used in other areas than trawling through this or trying to rewatch this, and so that's where I think that it's a smart use of AI.
Yeah. Another top tip as well, which I'll share with you and anyone listening. I trained my own version of ChatGPT to look at people's websites and tell me WTF, because we're brilliant in adtech of creating these wonderful websites that you go to, you spend 20 minutes looking around it, you come back and I'm still none the wiser, I still don't really know what they do. But what ChatGPT, if you train it with the right questions, is very good at, is it'll just simplify that. It'll go and it'll look around, it'll pass all that data and it'll come back and say, right, this is who they are, this is what they do, this is who they do it with, this is how they do it, and this is why you should care. And I'm like, that's brilliant. Like that is a game changer for me.
And time saver, right? Yeah. It's just efficiency, and it's way.
But it's also good for us to then be able to go back to a client and say, right, this is, I think, what you do. And they go, that's right. So what can we actually put that into the website then so others can find out,
I was just going to say that because it's interesting because it may be what the website says or what AI, and it would be really interesting to see what AI takes from the Utique website, actually. Like okay, great. What it brings back, that's a great tool to actually go and here's some ways you could perhaps improve what the information you're sharing. I was going to ask, is the AI tool also looking beyond the website into, on the web conversations, so to be able to also bring other data into what the company does and kind of then formulate together and say, we've heard this 3 times now, therefore this must be one of the things that they do.
Yeah.
But if you're just looking at the website, it's a good tool to.
Yeah, no, I start off literally just by giving it the URL and say, just look there. But that's not a bad idea to then perhaps build that out if your PR agency or marketing agency wanted to know what is the rest of the world saying about you. Like, go to these sites. You can't do that so much with ChatGPT anymore because it's been closed off. It doesn't get access to a lot of websites. When it first came out, it was brilliant. I could send it to all the trade press sites and say, right, tell me who said something today about curation, and it'll come back and give you the links, but slowly but surely they've all shut it off because they're worried about their IP being stolen, which is fair enough. Yeah. But something like Perplexity can still do that because it's more search than it is Gen AI. Yeah. And so it's quite useful. It's a little bit more time consuming, but yeah, it's a good thought.
I think it's really good. And I have just actually used AI to help plan my Christmas party.
Yeah?
Yeah, doing some activities around London. And it was like,
here's some questions. Yeah, again, search, right? It's great at search.
I'm doing like scavenger hunt in London. And it came up with this whole, this is what you could do. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. So then I started writing that out. And then at the bottom it says, was that helpful? Can I produce a planner document for you, which will, show about how you're going to point score and how you're going to select winners? I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, and then this PDF appears, and you're like, oh my God, this is just so cool.
Yeah,
saves so much time.
Very cool. Yeah. Okay. So the 2025 is going to be the year of action, not just talking.
Year of action, not just talking. And I think it's like, if we can, because we're trying to change mindsets along the way as well of, how there is a better way, and it doesn't have to, it's achievable. It can be done quite simply, and let's actually just embrace it and do it together. And also let's collaborate. We know who the real competition is. It's not who you think is your direct competitor as an industry I'm talking about. So news sites are highly
It's not the Telegraph versus the Guardian. It's Telegraph versus the Walled Gardens,
exactly.
Telegraph.
So, yeah. Exactly. And so we can't have another year of lack of action because time is running out. And regardless of what happens with Chrome and, the cookie deprecation there, it feels really old school to say that now. It's a challenge we have to solve now. And if we were going to rebuild the industry from the ground up now and re-architect it, we would start with having a baseline of, okay, great, a persistent way to identify everyone. Cool, that's done. And it's a commodity. It's not anything that everyone's like, it's the core. And then privacy has to be there. And we have to build user trust. Let's not fire 40 ads at them. Let's not make it really difficult to kind of navigate what they're trying to do. Let's not abuse the use of their data. Let's not completely disregard their consent. Let's not try and get around any sort of privacy regulation for as long as we can. If you were rebuilding it, you would do things the right way, and it's possible to do it. And that's what obviously we're out in the market talking about and trying to grow the adoption of that.
Yeah, very cool. I've got a couple of other questions, if I may. So at an SSP level then, is there ever going to be a time, or does it exist already, where they will essentially map all of those identifiers that you enable via a publisher, and then they can start building on them at an SSP level so that they can start building audiences using your IDs?
So no, because one thing I didn't mention actually is that the token or the pass that we, the adtech pass that we enable through FNRTB expires within 24 hours, and it's only a session length. It's actually only a session length ID, because we don't want to have that in the system available for extensive ID profiling or use outside of the first party. So we're all about enhancing a first party environment, whether that's a publisher or a brand, and building up and supporting their own first party data. What brands choose to do and add on, and can build on, that's obviously their own choice. But we're not about funding any massive kind of ID graph that just, again, I don't think is really the future of
no, it's just like a cookie by another name in that case, isn't it, if you do that? Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts?
I think we've covered a lot.
I think we have.
We have covered a lot, but yeah, I appreciate the time, and it's nice to kind of chat about many other things as well, but just to kind of understand about how we're viewing the world and where we're looking at. And
thank you for rushing all the way down from Manchester on this freezing cold November day.
Lots of snow on the way down.
Did you?
Yeah. Cool. There was it's like belts of snow, like Manchester none, and then there was like through Stoke there was loads, and then it was obviously none in London.
It's one of the benefits of being up north. They get better snow than we do. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you ever so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure as always.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.